When all the world knows beauty to be beautiful, there is already ugliness. When all the world knows goodness to be good, there is already evil. Thus, to be and not to be arise mutually. Do you see that you can't have a front without a back? That you can't have a top without a bottom? That you can't have the idea of long without the idea of short? You don't have a world in which there are bees without flowers or flowers without bees, because you see, bees and flowers are really the same organism. They look different, just as your head looks very different from your feet. But you don't have human beings who have heads and no feet, or feet and no heads. They go together. Now, of course, they're rather obviously joined by skin and bone. But bees and flowers float apart. Bees buzz and flowers send out smell and color. But they are the same organism because they're inseparable. They require each other. So this is the whole idea of arising together. So that, in other words, to be and not to be, the whole notion of is and isn't, depend on each other. Now, this is contrary to our common sense. We think that being is really there and non-being isn't. But we are at the same moment afraid that being may end up as non-being. There's so much more non-being than there is being. In other words, there seems to be so much more space than there is solid. And since whatever is solid in the world requires energy, and since energy eventually runs out, we're afraid that it may all end up as nothing. That we may end up as nothing and everything else. And we are scared stiff of that, because we don't understand that space or emptiness and solid are two aspects of one reality. Just as front and back, just as bees and flowers, they have to go together. You cannot possibly conceive a solid without a surrounding space. You cannot conceive space without solids occupying it, because space is, as a matter of fact, nothing but the relationship between solids. It's like an interval in music. You can't hear melody unless you hear intervals. But the intervals aren't there, there are the tones. The intervals are in a way an illusion, but the hearing of intervals, that is to say the steps between tones, is absolutely necessary for being able to hear melody. If you don't hear the intervals, you only hear a succession of noises. You are then tone deaf or tune deaf. So you see how important the interval is. And any architect, any artist knows that space is real. We talk about the functions of space. Astronomers and physicists talk about properties of space, curved space, and so on and so forth. But in the ordinary common sense that most people have, they think space just isn't there. Solids are there. Reality is therefore identified with the solid, with the energy, and unreality with the emptiness. And there is this, therefore, fundamental anxiety that arises from the fact that the moment you know you exist, you know you could not exist. And therefore, all through one's life, there is a sort of sword of Damocles hanging over you that at any minute you might not be. Wowee, and that's a real scare. Until you understand that to be or not to be is not the question. Because to be cannot be without not being, just as not being cannot be without being. The yang and the yin. The yang means the south side of a mountain, which is in the sun. And the yin means the north side of a mountain, which is in the shade. And so they come to mean positive and negative, black and white, male and female. But you see, the whole secret is that the yin and the yang are inseparable. Let's say when we were little children and everybody taught us 1, 2, 3 and ABC, they didn't teach us the lesson of black and white. This belongs, in a way, in our culture to the hushed up side of things. The lesson of black and white is this. If you realize that all your senses are really one sense. A kind of touching. You touch light with your eyes. You touch air vibrations with your eardrums and get sound. Then smell is touching gases and dust in the air. Taste is touching the texture of food and things. But do you realize that all sensation whatsoever is a vibration? It goes on and off. But if it goes fast enough, you don't notice the off. You only notice the on. But all things are like that, you see? On and off. And you can't have the vibration unless it's a wave pattern. The crest of the wave is on, the trough of the wave is off. Now, you can't have a wave, which is half a wave. In other words, no wave exists with a crest alone. There must be a trough. If you don't understand that, if you don't realize that on, off constitutes a unity, and although they are different, they're inseparable, like the two poles of a magnet. If you don't realize that, you get scared that off may win. And if you get scared that off may win, you start another game. The game on must win. And then the game degenerates into a fight. And you don't understand the relationship of yang and yin. So it is the inner connection, or rather the inseparability of yang and yin, which is what is meant by Tao. That's why Tao cannot be explained. And the reason, again, if I may put it in another way, is that all thinking is classification. It's asking, is you is or is you ain't? Is it this or is it that? Because after all, if you want to say something is inside, it requires an outside. You can't have an inside without an outside, or an outside without an inside. Which is it? And we've magnified this into a nightmare, where the ultimate consequence and destiny of the cosmos is, are you saved or are you damned? Forever. What people don't understand is that you don't know you belong to the saved group unless there's also a damned group. In every American town, there are the nice people who live on one side of the tracks and the not so nice people who live on the other. In my town, which is Sausalito, there are the people who live on the hill, and they are the nice people. And then there are the people who live on the waterfront, who are bohemians and beatniks and goodness only knows what. Well, now, when the nice people on top of the hill meet for their cocktail parties, the main thing that they discuss is how the whole town is deteriorating and how the awful people are proliferating and fouling the bay up and so on. And they feel that this boosts their collective ego because they know they're the nice people. Meanwhile, the bohemians and beatniks get together at their parties and they play like they're the real in-group, because all those squares and bourgeoisie who live up on the hill are engaged in a business rat race, doing work which is of no interest in order that they may buy toy rocket ships and have wall-to-wall carpets and horribly clean houses. And so bohemians and beatniks boost their collective ego by arguing against the people on top of the hill. What neither side realizes is they need each other. You don't know who you are if you want to belong to an in-group unless you define an out-group. It is the same with philosophy. One side is called prickles and the other is called goo. And prickles people are people who like things to be sharp and clear and definite and everything well in order. And they look upon other people who they think are vague and sloppy and unrealistic and wishful, and they say, ugh, you're just goo. Well, the goo people turn around and say, why, you're just bones. You just rattle. You've no skin on you. You know the words, yes, but you don't know the music. You have no finer feelings. Prickles people want to believe that the ultimate constituents of the material universe are particles. Goo people prefer to think of it as waves. The thing is that they don't realize that you wouldn't know the standpoint of prickles unless you knew goo as a contrast, and vice versa. Because the real world is gooey prickles and prickly goo. Any way you look at it. So you see, that's just the yang and the yin. The yang is prickles and the yin is goo. And they're inseparable, but quite different. And the thing is that to see wisdom is to understand the secret conspiracy between the opposites. That you wouldn't know one without the other. That is, it were Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, that under all explicit opposition there is implicit unity.